So good afternoon, everyone. This is the British Interplanetary Society, the West Midlands branch. I'm Bob Stanton, and it's good to see so many of you here today for Brian's talk. Very, very timely. Before Brian's talk, I want to hand over to my colleague Mark, and Mark's going to say a few words.
Right, very quick intro. If you could move forward, Bob. So the agenda for today is, as usual, quick introduction from me, and then we'll move into Brian's talk, which we're very, very pleased to have Brian talking about Japan in space today, very timely. And then there'll be a question section. The next thing that I'd like to mention is that some of you will know our former branch chair, John Harlow. Unfortunately, John passed away on the 11th of November 23. John was a long-time member of the British Interplanetary Society. He was president, I think, twice, and he held many positions on BIS main council. And he and I started the new branches off with the West Midlands some years ago. As well as that, John was a significant member of the British rocketry community. He held many posts. He worked at the rocket propulsion establishment, and he did a lot of consulting later on in life. So John will be very much missed by all of us. Thank you, Bob. Next one. So with the passing of John, we've had a small reorganisation for the West Mids. So Bob has now taken over as chair, his main role being to keep me in order. So I've stayed as secretary, and Adam Hibbard, I don't know if he's on here today. Oh, yeah, he is. Adam is the committee member, and he very kindly runs the social media for us. So if you could move on, Bob. As you just saw, there's only three of us, and we run, when things are going well, we run as many, if not more, events than headquarters. So if there's anybody out there that would like to lend a hand, giving us a bit of time to help run the West Midlands and organise talks and events, it would be much appreciated. Do get in touch if you're interested. It's not onerous. It just takes a little spare time. Thank you, Bob. So our future events in March. I know Valentin's in the audience. Valentin will be talking about the necessity for space migration, and these are all online talks. In June, Emily Creedy will be talking about laser ignition of hybrid rocket motors. That promises to be that's a subject close to my area of expertise, so that'll be very interesting for me. Move on, please, Bob. And then another propulsion-y type talk. You can tell my background is propulsion. In August, we have Christopher McLeod talking about the Aspire hypersonic engine. And then in November, we have a tentative talk arranged, still to be finally confirmed, and that's the Taiwan Space Agency and its programs. So
sorry, Mark, I've got to correct your pronunciation. As a Scot, it's McLeod.
Thank you,
McLeod.
My wife will, just as well, my wife's not listening.
Yes.
She's Scottish as well. Right. Anyway, if you could move on, Bob, please. So I did contact Italia, asked for other events from the other branches. I haven't had anything in. Hopefully at the next event we'll be able to put up some more other branch events. If we could move on, Bob. And the headquarters have a number of things in organisation, but the only things they've got on at publicising at the moment are the International Space Forum event in June, which is an all-day event. It's an attend or online, and of course the monthly online socials. If you could move on, Bob.
Right.
So, joining the BIS, please do join the BIS. You get videos, there's videos and symposia and conferences, great magazines, camaraderie. please join the BIS.
If I could just say, I think about 40% of you here today are non-members, and you're definitely missing out. We've got this Spaceflight magazine, for example, is the leading astronautics magazine. Keeps you well up to date in everything that's actually going on. All the things you would normally miss, all the things if you're even with the feeds and things you would have. This is much more in depth, much more exciting, much better photos. You want these. You want this.
Excellent. And I should have also mentioned, if anybody's interested in starting their own branch, do get in touch either with headquarters or with that or with this branch, being the lead branch. We can forward you on to headquarters or chat to you about the setting up a branch. Okay, Bob. So again, please join the BIS. Please. And final thing before we hand over to Brian. The Society is always looking for articles, website material, and new papers for its various magazines. So we've got Journal of the British Interplanetary Society, Chronicle, which is the history, and Spaceflight is the more populist magazine. So if you think you can help with that, please contact the editors or via headquarters. And with that, we're going to hand over to Brian. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, all right. First of all, just to say, I'll be speaking for about 35 minutes or so. There are quite a number of slides, but I'm going to go through them reasonably quickly. And there should be abundant time for comments, questions, etc. at the end. The Japanese space program goes back to the 1920s. It has a prehistory. Japan developed small rockets way back in the 1920s. The person we need to know about is Eiichi Iwaya, who is a senior naval officer posted to Berlin during the Second World War, but he already knew quite a bit about the potential of rocketry. He visited Augsburg, which was the plant where the Messerschmitt 163 was made, and instigated a plan to bring those designs back to Japan. These became the basis of Japan's rocket plane in the Second World War, the Shusui, not as well known as the Messerschmitt 163. But an important aspect of this is that Japanese progress was grossly underestimated by the Americans, who made very little effort to search for either Japanese rockets after the war or to try locate the Japanese rocket scientists. The way the designs got to Japan was because the Japanese Imperial Navy sent the submarine Igo 29 to collect the German rocket designs. It traveled all the way. It was a large ocean-going submarine. It arrived in Lorient in France in March 1944. Sorry, I'm missing one here. And it was duly received by the German authorities and began the long journey back. And that is how the Japanese came to have the rocket designs. The person who really started the Japanese post-war rocket program was this man here, Hideo Itokawa. And he fulfilled a similar role in Japan's space program, as did Sergei Korolev in Russia, Vikram Sarabhai in India, and so on. And he was the designer of the Hayabusa plane, which was one of the most successful planes in the Japanese army. It was to the army what the Mitsubishi Zero was to the Navy. In 1955, Hideo Itokawa wrote this article about launching rockets into space. Until 1953, Japan had been barred from rocket development. The post-war constitution of the country committed Japan to peaceful purposes only. No armed forces. It was called the Yoshida Doctrine after the Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida. And this is an important landmark because we come back to it later this afternoon. With the International Geophysical Year 1957-8, Japan saw the opportunity to participate in international science. Itokawa got small research grants and he built what were called pencil rockets, and that was not an accident because they were so very small. Only 23 centimeters long, 1.8 in diameter. He made 150 of these and fired them off in a rifle range in Tokyo starting in April 1955. He then moved on to a beachside launch site in Michikawa in Akita on the main island of Japan, Honshu. The first launch there was from August 1955. The rockets got bigger. They were called the Pencil 300, then the Baby, and they added radio transmitters, parachutes for recovery. These began to attract quite large crowds, and they had to introduce ticketing to try control the numbers. Boats went to watch even for offshore, and it attracted wider media interest with the BBC filming. I wish we could see the film of it still. I don't know if they kept it. And Stars and Stripes, the American military magazine. This was mission control. As you can see, it lacks, the light bulbs lack some of the sophistication of modern mission controls. They operated from a wooden hut. Equipment was brought in by horse. Light bulbs showed the various stages of the countdown. But in the background, you can see the high level of popular interest in these early rocket firings. The rockets flew higher and higher. The original series, and you'll notice that following the Greek alphabet, were followed by the Kappa and the Lambda. They reached 18 kilometers in 1957. He used solid fuels, which were unusual at the time. He was called Dr. Rocket in the Japanese press. But the government, with Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone, who subsequently became Prime Minister, established the Space Council. So there was official interest growing. Itokawa formed in the University of Tokyo, the Institute for Space and Aeronautical Science, which is still running, and that became his base. Japan became one of only 4 countries to launch rockets, as distinct from satellites, during the International Geophysical Year. The Kappa reached an altitude of 200 kilometers. The Kappa 9 was multi-stage, and he was reaching as high as 310 kilometers in the next few years. So I think I'm missing one. In the meantime, they needed to set up a much bigger, newer launch site, and they chose a place called Kagoshima. It is at the very, very southern tip of the Japanese archipelago, and this is the launch site being constructed on rather hilly type of landscape. They figured out that if you added to the stages of a solid rocket booster, you could just about get a small satellite into orbit. The project was approved by the government, and eventually, after I think it was 4 attempts, they finally succeeded with Osumi in February 1970. It had the simplicity in the form of guidance control, but they had no inertial guidance system, so they had to fire it at the right angle just to reach orbit. Itokawa had been forced out of the Japanese space program at this stage, and he heard the news in exile, as it were, where he was in the Arabian desert. And his driver, who had heard the news on the radio, said that Itokawa sobbed endlessly with delight to hear the news of his satellite finally getting into orbit the 11th of February 1970. The Kagoshimans duly celebrated. The big question was whether it would be Japan or China as the 4th nation into space after the USSR, the US and France. Japan just beat China by a few months. And then, as you can see from the list, and this is important from the periodization, Britain 1971, then India, Israel, Iran, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the Republic of Korea. It was widely assumed, though, and this is important here, that Japan would lead Asia's space effort from that moment on and proceed on to the first Asian piloted, human-piloted spaceflight.